You ever wonder why so many people seem to buy so easily into whatever it is the left is selling? Because the left makes these issues seem so morally clear. And separating fact from fiction, it takes work. And I've done the work.
Oh, have you now? Have you really done the work, Ben? Because when it comes to making moral issues seem so clear, you're one of the first people that comes to mind.
Once a week, I'll take a commonly made leftist claim, the kind of claim that your friends push all over your social media feed, and I'll walk you through all the supporting research to debunk their arguments and expose every fallacy the left throws at you. And what's better, I'll do it in 15 minutes or less.
Really? You're going to walk us through all the supporting research in 15 minutes or less. And what's more, you're going to additionally debunk every relevant leftist argument within that allotted time. That is a tall order, Ben.
You could spend years researching these topics, you could read all of the books, or you could just come hang out with me here every week and know more on all of these topics than all your leftist friends. Become an expert. Debunked. Only on the Daily Wire.
Alright, why not? Let's become an expert by paying for a Daily Wire account. Who needs the Academy, huh? They're all just leftist shills anyway. All we need is 15 minutes or less with Ben. If you've been following me for a while, then you'll know that I've long branded myself around the word debunked. I mean, I even have a card game called Debunked in which you can hit slap your friends. But long after I built my brand around Debunked, Ben Shapiro decided to do the same, even following a very similar format to myself. Whereas I've methodically addressed theological, philosophical, and pseudoscientific arguments, focusing especially on logic, facts, and fallacies, Ben combines facts, logic, and the skills of a highly trained lawyer, you know, the profession notorious for warping facts to fit their case, to methodically discredit the most pervasive fallacies promulgated by the political left. Indeed, he debunks such things as transgender ideology, the notion that the rich don't pay their fair share, JFK assassination conspiracies, because, yeah, apparently this is specifically leftist. And, of course, the topic of today, he's debunked atheists in his Atheist Delusion. Now, I know that I'm fashionably late in responding to this atheist documentary from Ben, as both Drew McCoy of Genetically Modified Skeptic and Alex O'Connor of Cosmic Skeptic have already addressed the whole thing. But despite their analyses, which I recommend and I've linked below, I've got plenty more to say. Though, to prevent excessive repetition, I'm going to take a different approach. Rather than responding to the whole thing chronologically, I'm going to compartmentalise. In this video, I'm going to focus on Ben's rhetoric and logic. In the next video, I'm going to address his due diligence and references, and then finally, I'm going to critique his arguments. So, if this Shapiro triad of tripe sounds exciting, then be sure to subscribe and hit the bell to be notified of the next installment. Oh, would you look at that? By paying for a Daily Wire account, I now get adverts informing me that I can kick woke companies out of my bathroom. Yep, Jeremy's is 100% woke free, don't you know?
Right.
Considering that Ben and I appreciate logical fallacies, I think that this is a befitting place to start. As viewers of my channel are well aware, logical fallacies are errors in reasoning that undermine the logic of an argument, and be we leftists or rightists, most of us commit such errors frequently and with relish. In fact, I just did. I issued a black and white fallacy, otherwise known as a false dichotomy, since I presented just two possibilities, leftists and rightists, where more may exist, such as enlightened centrists. Now, one of the most common logical fallacies committed, and especially in politics, is the straw man fallacy, which occurs when someone misrepresents a position or argument to make it easier to refute. For instance, if you said, "I think we should give better study grades to students," I could strawman your position by saying, "You think we should give out A's to everyone." And let's face it, if you're happy to give out A's to everyone, then your bathroom is probably full of woke soap. Closely related to the strawman fallacy, and far more strategically compelling, is nutpicking, which occurs when someone presents an atypical or weak member of a group as if they are a typical or even strong representative. And rather than me giving you an example of this, let's have Ben do so.
One of the sort of dishonest things that I think happens in abortion debates is arguing from the fringes. This tends to happen a lot, is pro-choice activists will argue from rape and incest to the other 99.8% of abortions. Or you'll see people on the pro-life side argue from partial birth abortion to all of abortion. You actually have to take on sort of the mainstream case and then decide whether or not that's acceptable or not.
Indeed, many pro-choice advocates will nitpick the pro-life side and then express, with loaded language, that the anti-choice side want to force rape victims to give birth. And likewise, many pro-life advocates will nitpick the pro-choice side and then express, with loaded language, that the anti-life side want to kill children up until birth. As Ben rightfully emphasises, arguing from the fringes in this way is toxically unproductive, and I'd add that it only serves to confirm our flock's biases. I mean, put it this way. If we won't accurately and fairly engage with our opposition's views, what progress can we possibly hope for? If we refuse to treat our opposition with respect, what respect can we expect in return? As a relevant book might put it, we reap what we sow. I, for one, am utterly exhausted by the toxic tribalism that besets our current discourse, and Ben, it seems, shares my exhaustion. Given this, we can expect for him not to strawman or nutpick atheism, can't we? We might call Ben many things, but a hypocrite is not among them, is it? We can expect for him to have done the work.
It takes work. And I've done the work.
And thus, at the very least, to have a solid understanding of what atheism is and is not. This highly trained lawyer is, surely, better than those that argue from the fringes. Well, let's watch his introduction.
Listen, there's no way to blame people who don't believe in God because they've experienced enormous amounts of personal pain. God is apart from human beings, and if we understood the mind of God, then we would be like God in his totality, which we are not. That does not mean that you're not feeling the pain that you are feeling. It doesn't mean you don't have a right to feel angry at God. But understand that the struggle with God is a part of religion itself. Being a religious believer is the consistent struggle with the logic of the universe, and that seems to me a deeper and more fulfilling struggle than simply pretending the universe has no meaning at all.
Alrighty, let's take our time to break this down. Ben opened his atheist delusion by saying,
Listen, there's no way to blame people who don't believe in God because they've experienced enormous amounts of personal pain.
And so let's ask, shall we, who precisely is Ben referring to here? Is it the typical atheist? When we ask the average atheist why they don't believe in gods, do they say it's because they've experienced too much personal pain? Put another way, is Ben really following his own ethos here?
You actually have to take on sort of the mainstream case.
No, he isn't. This is, at best, a very weak strawman of the problem of evil. And so contrary to his own ethos, Ben has chosen to open by, at best, strawmanning the problem of evil. More likely, however, he's chosen to nutpick for rhetorical effect. While you'd be hard-pressed to find an atheist that says they're an atheist due to experiencing too much personal pain, you'll probably find one on the fringes somewhere. But focusing on this fringe case instead of the mainstream is, of course, to nutpick. Ben is a smart guy, isn't he? He's not an idiot. He knows what he's doing, and so he's well aware that by nutpicking in this way, he's strongly implying from the outset that atheism is fundamentally an emotional enterprise, that it's not logical. And should you be uncomfortable with my accusation here, then you're going to find the alternative insufferable, because if Ben didn't deliberately nutpick, then he must have done so unintentionally, which means that he's embarrassingly uninformed on the topic. But he's not uninformed, is he? Ben has done his research, we see him scrolling, and we hate it. So no, Ben knows perfectly well that the reason the vast majority of philosophers and scientists are atheists is because they thought long and hard about theistic propositions. They, like the majority of atheists, are not atheists simply because they've experienced too much personal pain. And in case you're still not quite on board with my critique here, let's flip the script. If I wanted to present theism as an emotional enterprise, I could likewise nutpick by saying, listen, there's no way to blame people who believe in God because they can't handle the mere possibility that the entire universe doesn't revolve around them. If I did this, I'd be, at best, opening a documentary on theism by centre staging a fringe case, and I shouldn't think that the average theist would appreciate this. Anyhow, from here, Ben gave us his refutation to this extremely undersubscribed position.
God is apart from human beings, and if we understood the mind of God, then we would be like God in his totality, which we are not.
On the surface, Ben's statement here is really quite odd. He's reasoning that in order to understand the mind of God, which of course presupposes that God actually exists and has a mind, which in the context of debating God's existence is begging the question, we'd need to be like God in his totality. That is, we'd need to be God in order to understand God. Now, I could focus on why this is nonsensical. It's akin to claiming that in order to understand photosynthesis, we'd have to be a plant. But I think our attention is better spent on asking, why did Ben state and then address this fringe view? Again, he's not a fool. Well, assuming that Ben knows what he's doing, I think the reason that he included this fringe view and response is really quite obvious. As discussed, his opening sentence primes atheists as emotional, and this second sentence coats atheists as unreasonable. Ben is making out that atheists insist that we understand the mind of God in order to believe in God, but we don't. Atheists no more demand to know the mind of God in order to believe in the existence of God than does Ben demand to know the mind of Astrius in order to believe in the existence of the Minotaur. Moving on to Ben's third coat of paint, let's recall his chosen colour.
That does not mean that you're not feeling the pain that you are feeling. It doesn't mean you don't have a right to feel angry at God.
Yeah, anger. Anger is the third paint. How delightful. So Ben's first sentence primes atheists as emotionally motivated, his second sentence coats atheists as unreasonable, and his third sentence washes atheists as angry. No, sorry, angry at specifically God, a being that we don't believe exists. You know, it's just the same as how Ben and I are absolutely furious at the Loch Ness Monster. This is a straw man. Atheists are not angry at that which they don't believe exists. They're angry, if at all, at theists like Ben repressing others based on his belief that God exists, and that God has very specific views that just so happen to align with Ben's political and moral intuitions. Finally, Ben closed his opening with the following.
And understand that the struggle with God is a part of religion itself. Being a religious believer is the consistent struggle with the logic of the universe, and that seems to me a deeper and more fulfilling struggle than simply pretending the universe has no meaning at all.
To think, I actually paid for this Ray Comfort level straw man. Outside of the proposition of whether or not gods exist, atheism is silent. Atheism doesn't entail any specific views on epistemology, metaphysics, or, of course, anything else, including whether or not the universe has a purpose. To present atheists as if we're committed to believing that the universe has no meaning at all is akin to presenting theists as if they're committed to believing that Jesus resurrected. Just as theism doesn't, in and of itself, entail that Jesus resurrected, atheism doesn't, in and of itself, entail that the universe has no purpose. Ben making this rudimentary mistake is one thing, but his addition of accusing atheists of merely pretending to hold this view is disgraceful.
And that seems to me a deeper and more fulfilling struggle than simply pretending the universe has no meaning at all.
Not only has Ben strawmanned atheism here, but he's accused atheists, all atheists, of being disingenuous. Imagine saying that all theists merely pretend to believe that God exists and thinking that you're the good guy. This is breathtakingly absurd. But now that we've covered Ben's introduction, yes, that was just his introduction, let's proceed.
God, according to atheists, is an unnecessary hypothesis. The universe just is. We just are. There's no reason to search for a creator, to posit that he cares about us, to suggest that there is some higher power that bridges the gap from what is to how things ought to be.
So let me again emphasize the pressing dichotomy before us. When Ben claims that atheists think the universe just is,
the universe just is.
We just are.
We just are.
And that there's no reason at all to even consider theism.
There's no reason to search for a creator.
Recall that he's either saying these things because he earnestly believes that atheists are committed to these views, which is to say he's extremely uninformed, or he's deliberately presenting atheists in this shallow way for rhetorical purposes. As said, atheism doesn't entail any belief about the universe, nor our existence, and so this is yet another straw man from Ben. And talking of the straw man fallacy, Ben gives us another just a few moments later while defining atheism.
Atheism, however, adamantly opposes the idea of a God who stands behind nature.
You scorn churches and the concept of God. Are these accurate criticisms?
Yes.
I wonder, Does Ben adamantly oppose the idea that bad air stands behind disease, or does he simply find the miasma theory of disease unconvincing? What we're witnessing here, again, is loaded language. The word adamantly is defined as in a way that suggests one will not be persuaded to change one's mind, firmly and resolutely, and thus it carries a connotation of unreasonableness. As Ben has made more than clear at this point, atheism isn't, according to him, an earnest and respectful view that permeates academia due to its intellectual virtue. No, atheists are, according to Ben, unreasonable, angry, and adamantly emotionally motivated to merely pretend to hold their views. You know, when I reviewed Michael Knowles' interview with Anthony DeStefano, which is also a Daily Wire production, I was thinking to myself that Big Boss Ben surely likewise finds Anthony cringy. But as we've seen from less than 2 minutes of Ben's polished atheist documentary, it's crystal clear that he's no better than Anthony. In fact, Ben could have written Anthony's book for him. And that's just sad. And to make a quick comment on Ben featuring a quote from Ayn Rand, does Ben seriously think that Ayn is a typical representation of an atheist? Really? Ayn was an adamant political libertarian, which isn't exactly in favour of the welfare state, is it? It's not very left according to American politics. She held many controversial views, with none of them being entailed by atheism. And as for the video Ben plays of a church being torn down by, presumably, Soviet demand, we have to ask, does Ben think that the average atheist wants to tear down religious buildings? That not being convinced of theism somehow entails abusing theists? Take England and Wales, for instance, where now less than half our population are Christian and a third of us are irreligious. Are we running around pulling churches down? No. We don't typically want to prevent religious people from being religious. It's your toy and you can play with it privately however you like. But you are not to make us play with it. That's liberalism 101. And even with the vacated churches, we tend to convert them into community centres instead of destroying them. I've been to church, if you will, over 10 times in the last year to play table tennis. We tend to respect our heritage, not destroy it. Now, Ben including this video of church destruction isn't, it seems to me, merely a misunderstanding of secularism. Again, he isn't this shallow, he knows what he's doing. He's included this video to, yet again, paint atheists in a negative way. We're not just emotionally motivated, unreasonable, angry, and merely pretending to hold our views, but we're also destructive. All of this rhetoric serves to depict the outgroup as monsters, which only serves, in this case, to radicalize the irrational hate that some theists hold towards atheists. And as we should all be aware by now, once we're convinced of absurdities, we're more likely to commit atrocities.
If we're just balls of meat wandering around in space, how exactly do we make choices?
This straw man from Ben is given just a minute later. As already said, atheism doesn't necessitate any view on the free will debate. Some atheists are determinists, upholding, for instance, compatibilism, while others reject determinism, often embracing libertarianism, such as Ayn Rand. Yeah, the person that Ben just displayed in another context as a typical atheist. And on Ben's ball of meat line in reference to libertarian free will, this happens to be the crux of his all-time favourite argument for God's existence, which I've addressed elsewhere should you be interested. Anyhow, let's continue.
Atheists claim that the evolutionary process relieved the need for God. After all, if God wasn't directing the process of the creation of human beings in the literalistic interpretation of the biblical creation story, who needed God? The problem, of course, is that evolution is an extraordinarily complex process that does not forestall the possibility of a directing hand.
The process of evolution is extraordinarily complex, yes, but the principle of natural selection isn't. It's similar to general relativity in this regard. The details of every case is very complex, but the principle is very simple. In the aim of actually giving the general atheist position a bit of meat, because Ben sure as hell hasn't, let's approach this angle obliquely. In 1790, Immanuel Kant famously said, "There will never be a Newton of the blade of grass, because human science will never be able to explain how a living being can originate from inanimate matter." And while questions of abiogenesis are yet to be answered, that is, the appeal to ignorance is still technically intact, Darwin's evolution by natural selection explained precisely how simple forms have become so complex and intricate, such as a blade of grass. Kant, to put it bluntly, was certain that we'd never be able to make sense of life without presupposing God. But he was wrong. In our ignorance, we have historically bet all we have on God, and 1,000 times over we've seen naturalism win the race. Naturalism has displaced theism again and again and again. Where we once believed that lightning is divine anger, we now don't. Where we once believed that volcanoes are of supernatural origin, we now don't. Where we once believed that the gods held the planets in place, we now don't. Where we once believed in witches, we now don't. Where we once believed the gods cause crop failure, we now don't, and so on and so forth. But can you name a single instance in which theism displaced science? A single situation where we had a scientific understanding only for theism to usurp it? You see, the typical atheist doesn't, as Ben insists.
Atheists claim that the evolutionary process relieved the need for God.
This is, at best, scraping up the most crushed of nuts. The average atheist tends to look at all the rebutting defeaters we have against theism, and especially theistic appeals to ignorance, and considers evolution by natural selection to be the most compelling. And if Ben wished to take issue with this view, then he ought to have actually presented it, rather than so pathetically indulging in what he claims to oppose.
You actually have to take on sort of the mainstream case.
But, of course, he's only got 15 minutes, which is still, apparently, better than reading all the books. Alright, my goodness. Let's get to another straw man from Ben.
The very specific conditions under which our universe was created that allowed for the development of intelligent human life are often used by believers as proof of God's hand. The so-called fine-tuning of the universe for life is extraordinary. Atheists claim that just because you won the lottery doesn't mean that you won because somebody intended for you to win the lottery. Somebody had to win. But that doesn't answer the question. If you kept winning the lottery over and over and over and over again, billions of times, at some point, you might suppose that somebody was cheating.
This claim about atheists comes just after Ben presents, loosely, the fine-tuning argument, which I'm going to address thoroughly and in full in another instalment. But what does he mean when he says that atheists believe that we've won the lottery over and over again, and yet still won't consider the mere possibility that someone intended for us to win? This sounds utterly bonkers, doesn't it? Well, strawmanning objections often does make objections sound bonkers. There are many responses to the fine-tuning argument, which again I'll delve into in another video, with some of the most popular focusing on probabilities. Ben doesn't clarify which specific objection he's debunking, and so I'm going to have to assume that it's the multiverse one. The chances of rolling sequentially 5 6-sided dice and getting a 6 on each die is 1 in 7,776. That's pretty rare. But if we were to repeat the roll of the 5 dice, that is, if we were to repeat the experiment, say, 1 billion times, then the chances of at least one of those experiments yielding all 6s is extremely likely. It's almost guaranteed. Likewise, if we assume the premise that life can only emerge under extreme conditions, and simultaneously can't rule out that the experiment hasn't been conducted a near infinite number of times, then it's no surprise that life exists. It's almost guaranteed. That is, so long as there has been that many rolls. And needless to say, all of this is assuming that the results really are random chance, which is a minority view altogether. Ben has very sloppily taken this objection, or one that's similar, and has stripped it of its most crucial element, its consideration of repeated rolls. And that's why his depiction of atheists here, as if we all uphold the same objections and views, is so damn absurd. So what are we to make of the frankly impressive number of strawman and nutpicking fallacies that feature in Ben's short and polished documentary? Especially given that he's spoken out in frustration of these fallacies when others commit them. What are we to make of his heavy rhetoric against atheists, depicting us as emotionally motivated, unreasonable, destructive, shallow, and merely pretending to hold our views? Well, for the typical atheist, the answer is quite simple, or at least it seems so to me. Ben acts in accordance with the likes of Ray Comfort, Kent Hovind, and Anthony DeStefano, and so most atheists do, and will probably continue, to largely ignore Ben, only to enjoy the odd laugh and cringe at his expense every once in a while. But for the theist watching, I think the answer is more complicated, And it's out of respect to theists that I'm not going to sugarcoat this. If you're a theist and you don't see an issue with Ben confidently stating that atheists simply pretend that the universe has no meaning at all while depicting us as angry, unreasonable, shallow, and all the rest, then the reason that your atheist and agnostic family are not all that fond of you, the reason that you no longer have atheist friends, is down to you. You have become so deluded by your inner circle that you can't even recognize the most egregious misrepresentations of your loved ones. And if you end up alone, without them in your life, as they continue to drift away from you, then you will have reaped what you sowed. If you can't afford the most basic respect to your loved ones, you have no right to expect their love in return. People like Ben monetize your insecurities, and he couldn't care less of the destruction it might have on your family. Saying that atheists don't sincerely hold their views is, straight up, an accusation of insincerity. What conversation can be had? Ask yourself, what conversation can be had when you refuse to even acknowledge your loved ones? Surely there's a verse or two from your holy book that can prevent you from this madness. On the one hand, Ben seems to be well aware of how toxic and corrosive strawmanning and nutpicking can be, even speaking out against it. But on the other hand, he embodies this toxicity to a frankly comical degree. It turns out that for Ben, at least, hypocrisy is just a leftist fallacy. If I were a theist, Ben's utter failure to even grasp the basics of atheism, all while confidently and condescendingly demonizing them, would cause me to unsubscribe from the Daily Wire in and of itself. Put it this way, if the Daily Wire's roots are this rotten, its fruit is going to be pure poison. But as an atheist, I won't be unsubscribing. No, I'm going to expose more of Ben's bullshit. Throughout this video, I've made reference to my card game, Debunked. And you know what? I'm going to just come out and say this. I think this would make for a wonderful Christmas present. It's genuinely a fun game. I've been told that by lots of people at this point. It's a simple game, very fun. You don't need to actually understand the cards. The game is a very simple mechanic, but it additionally serves as an educational tool, since it contains so many fallacies and so many examples of those fallacies. So yeah, if you want to help me out, and you also want to get your hands on a game before Christmas, then please do consider buying one. Anyhow, as always, thank you kindly for the view, and an extra special thank you to my wonderful patrons and YouTube members. Until next time, my fellow apes, until next time.